Hi everyone, Coldon here with another VOX Immortalis commentary guide. This video is the first video in our heroic series against Halfus Wyrmbreaker, and this of course shows the 10-man version. I'll explain kind of what we're doing at the start here since there's a lot going on, and then I'll get into the raid setup stuff later. So you can see we pull Halfus to directly in front of the whelp cage. We also immediately activate the whelps, the Storm Rider, and the Nether Scion. Those two drakes and whelps are pretty much required that you activate right away. If you don't activate the whelps, then the Scorching Breath from the behemoth is twice as much damage, and that plus random fireballs will pretty much guaranteed to kill someone. Similarly, if you don't activate Storm Rider, you can't interrupt Shadow Nova just like normal. And again, in the heroic version, that is pretty much going to kill you. And lastly, Nether Scion, of course, applies the debuff to Halfus that lowers attack speed and damage. And without that, the damage from Halfus is pretty significant, but more importantly, his stacking debuff that he puts on the tank is just going to go up way too quickly. So, strongly suggest you get those three immediately. And a lot of strategies also grab the Time Warden immediately. We did try that for a while, but we just found it was a little bit too much spike damage on the tanks. So we stick with these three, and then we get the Time Warden briefly. So the general strategy here at the start is to stick Halfus on a single tank, so as a druid I grab him. We have our Death Knight tank on the whelps, because he has the strongest AE threat of all the tanks. And then we have a Paladin who's on the two drakes, because he has the strongest block mechanics. And then once AE threat is established, the Death Knight calls for DPS, and all AE that is decent is focusing on the whelps. And if you have any players or classes that are not very strong AE, to no fault of their own, they can focus single target. So our Enhancement Shaman, for example, just sticks to single target damage during the E phase. But if you have classes like Demonology Warlocks or Fire Mages, they do extremely good damage during that portion of the fight. Specifically, Fire Mages have the ability to attack Halfus and then use Combustion and their dot spread to take advantage of the damage debuff that Halfus gains when other drakes are activated. So during the time we're killing whelps, we actually have a 150% damage boost since three things are active on Halfus. So that can really add up the damage. One thing you will find if you're learning this fight, however, is if you do a strategy like this where everything is stacked up, then threat from the AE can be extremely high, and it's kind of problematic for tanks at times. If you have tricks or misdirects, those are very useful. But even then, sometimes streaks can happen and DPS will just get insane numbers. So your tanks need to be ready for that. Your DPS need to have their aggro drops ready if they have such abilities. So once the whelps died, we activate the Time Warden, as I mentioned, and around that time, as the first tank of Halfus, my debuff stack was getting fairly high. So what we do is, if you have a Paladin in your raid, you can use Hand of Protection to drop that stack. Just make sure you have a cancel or a macro, and then taunt to get him back if you need to. But in our case, it just happened to be with the timing on this, that just as I was getting rid of my stack, the whelps were dead. So we have our Death Knight pick up Halfus, and then I pick up the Time Warden that just came out. So that's kind of what we did there. And then DPS focus on the Storm Rider. So he's since been killed, as you'll see here. But after the whelps, you pretty much are just focusing down single target drakes. In our case, we just pick them in order of highest threat that they have on the tank, so there's no chance for DPS to pull them, which in our case is Storm Rider, and then Nether, and then finally Time Warden. But really it does not matter. Once they're activated, it's irrelevant which one you kill. They have the same health, they deal the same damage, so it doesn't make a difference. And other than that, you're kind of at the point, just like a normal at this point, where you're managing Halfus stacks by switching tanks frequently. And once the Time Warden is active, then the rest of the raid can actively dodge Fireball Barrage, which you see is going off there. Before the Time Warden is active, it's really not worth even trying, because the cast speed and the movement, travel distance is so short that the fireballs are pretty much unavoidable. So it's better to actually stay still, spread out slightly, and just heal through it. There can be some rare, but they do occur, unlucky occurrences where fireballs will just target the same person over and over and during the non-time warden phase, and you pretty much can't save them. But those are rare enough that we found it was still worth saving the time warden until things were a little more stable. So I mentioned we have 3 tanks. It's also a good time to mention we have 3 healers. We're using a paladin, a shaman, and a discipline priest. And if you're trying this fight or you researched it at all, you'll probably know that discipline priests are extremely common on this. And the only real reason is to take advantage of the damage debuff that Halfus gains for Drake release, because the smite spamming, which translates into atonement heals, of course will scale off of that damage boost. So with 3 or 4 Drakes active, usually 4 through most of the fight, it's pretty typical to see 30, 40, 50,000 heals from a priest. So if you have a priest in your raid, or even multiples, strongly suggest that you have them spec into that. It's a very simple thing to do, even if you're not very well geared for that sort of spec, and it makes a huge difference. The heals are not completely smart, but they do bounce to melee and tank targets, so that's kind of why everything is bunched up, so that all tanks are within that atonement range off of Halfus. So having said that, then the rest of your healers still need to focus on tanks a lot, and of course the rest of the raid. The ranged and the casters generally aren't going to get atonement heals, although they can if they stand close enough, but we found it was better to keep them sort of grouped up in the center, kind of around that small purple area. Just not close enough to splash fireballs, but then you can use like healing rains or AE effects to hit everyone. So once the first 4 Drakes or 3 Drakes plus the whelps are dead, then as you saw there, we activated the Slay Dragon. And this actual video and kill was our first time activating the Slay Dragon at this point. And we did it because we had a number of wipes on Halfus when he was around 7, 8, 9%, where we hit the Berserk timer, which didn't have enough DPS to finish him off. So we decided, well, we're not activating the Slate Dragon. If we do so, that'll add another 50% damage boost on him, on Halfus, and that'll give us the DPS we need. Of course, the difficulty is that once Halfus goes into his final phase, once he reaches 50%, he starts these Furious Roar casts, as you're probably aware from normal mode. And this causes 3 stun knockdowns in a row. For Halfus himself, that's fine because he stops meleeing so he can cast the spells. But for any other Drake that's active, such as the Slate Dragon, that Drake will continue meleeing during the Furious Roar. What that means is the tank that has aggro on the Slate Dragon is going to take full damage from the melee attacks, because the tank is knocked down, and therefore their avoidance, like dodge and parry, are completely negated for that moment. So, as you saw a moment ago, when we activated the Slate, Furious Roar was just starting to cast, so I tried to taunt him, because our basic strategy was to have the Slate Dragon tanked like normal with one of the tanks, and then just as Furious Roar is beginning, have another tank taunt from far away. And that idea was to have the Slate Dragon traveling during most of the Furious Roar so he wouldn't actually melee. But as you saw, killed me pretty quick, partly my own fault. And likewise, one of our other tanks died there as well. So if you do this sort of strategy where you have a Drake left over, you're going to need very strong cooldowns on that tank before each Furious Roar. But if they have a strong cooldown and they're full health, they should be able to survive it. But even then, you just need to be aware of that. But as I said, this was our first try actually getting the Slate Dragon activated, and as you'll see, it made all the difference in the world. The huge advantage, of course, is that the Slate Dragon causes Halfus to be stunned. So basically 33% of the fight, once the Slate is active, Halfus will be stunned. And that's a huge benefit. It can cause the Furious Roar casts to be interrupted, which is just immensely helpful. And of course it lowers the stat count on the tank. So I really recommend it if you can do it. And that's pretty much all of Halfus. So good luck. Thanks for watching.
Dots. He's stunned. Oh, Jesus.
Good job.
Oh, my God.
That's awesome.
Bowser for the win.
Wow.